June 23, 1944. West of the Cape Verde Islands, roughly 870 nautical miles out in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Commander Uno Kameo was in the cramped control room of the massive Japanese cargo submarine, I-52. This vessel was carrying a vital cargo for German-occupied France: 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin and precious war materials. Kameo watched through his periscope as the German submarine U-530 slipped into the darkness, having just transferred 2 technicians and radar equipment. The rendezvous had been smooth. Soon the submarine would surface, beginning its night run toward Europe at 15 knots under starless skies. Everything appeared to be perfect. Yet within 3 hours, Commander Kameo and his 94 crewmen would be dead. They would become victims of a technology whose existence they were unaware of. The sounds of their submarine breaking apart would be captured by American aircraft circling overhead, recorded on wire spools. These aircraft listened via devices floating on the ocean surface. Dropped from an Avenger torpedo bomber, these sonobuoys would transmit the death throes of I-52 to operators miles above, marking more than just the destruction of one submarine. They signaled the psychological demolition of Japanese naval confidence. The ocean, once the highway to empire for Japan, had been transformed into an American surveillance grid where nothing could hide. The mathematics of this technological asymmetry were being written across the Pacific in statistics that would shatter every assumption Japanese submariners held about their mission, their capabilities, and their chances of survival. Asymmetry. The staggering numbers between 1941 and 1945. American submarines would account for 56% of all Japanese merchant losses, sinking 1,214 Japanese ships, which totaled 5.3 million tons. Despite their impressive size and technical sophistication, Japanese submarines would only sink 184 Allied ships, totaling merely 1 million tons. This disparity was not simply numerical. It represented a fundamental difference in how the two nations approached industrial production, technological innovation, and undersea warfare. While Japan constructed the world's largest submarines, vessels capable of carrying aircraft and circumnavigating the globe, America was building sonar systems that could hear them approaching from miles away. Japanese engineers designed magnificent vessels, but American factories produced acoustic torpedoes, FM sonar, sonobuoys, and radar systems faster than Japan could even conceptualize countermeasures. This transformation wouldn't begin with one single dramatic moment. Instead, it unfolded through thousands of encounters where Japanese submariners slowly realized they were being hunted by forces they couldn't see, systematically eliminated by an industrial machine of incomprehensible scale, and tracked by technologies they didn't understand. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, commanding officer of the massive submarine aircraft carrier I-401, later told American interrogators after his August 1945 surrender that the moment he knew Japan had lost the war came not from any battle. It was from overhearing American radio traffic during a patrol. The sheer volume of coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, and the casual efficiency all pointed to capabilities Japan simply could not match. But for thousands of Japanese submariners, this realization dawned through direct, terrifying encounters with American anti-submarine warfare technology. Encounters that left survivors demoralized and stunned. The story of how Japanese submarine crews came to understand American technological superiority is one of cumulative revelation, not heroic last stands or dramatic battles. It's a story of technological shock so profound that it transformed confident warriors into men who understood their cause was hopeless long before. Their nation officially surrendered. The finest fleet becomes the hunted in. December 1941. The Japanese submarine force that entered World War II was one of the world's finest. Japan possessed approximately 70 ocean-going submarines, many of revolutionary design. The I-400 class submarines, the largest in the world until the appearance of nuclear-powered vessels in the 1960s, measured 400 feet long. Displacing 5,900 tons submerged, they could carry 3 Aichi M6A1 Siran floatplane bombers in a watertight hangar, launch them via catapult, and theoretically strike targets as distant as the Panama Canal or New York City. Traveling 37,500 nautical miles at 14 knots, each I-400 class submarine carried enough fuel to circumnavigate the globe 1.5 times without refueling. The engineering was magnificent. These submarines featured air search radar, demagnetization cables to protect against magnetic mines, special trim systems for submerged loitering, and anechoic coatings designed to absorb sonar pulses. Smaller Japanese submarines were equally impressive. Fast attack submarines prowled the Pacific with impressive underwater capabilities and long-range torpedoes, while the Type C cargo submarines like I-52 could travel 21,000 nautical miles, carrying vital strategic materials between its allies and Japan. Japanese submariners trained extensively, understood their boats intimately, and practiced stealth operations. Many had years of experience. His crews were skilled, disciplined, and confident. Commander Tatsunosuke Ariazumi, who would lead submarine operations late in the war, was considered one of Japan's finest underwater tacticians. They had reason for this confidence. In the war's early months, Japanese submarines successfully participated in the Pearl Harbor operation, hunted Allied warships, supported fleet operations, and reconnoitered American positions. The doctrine emphasized protecting Japanese naval assets, fleet support, conducting reconnaissance, and attacking high-value military targets. Unlike American submarines, which would focus on commerce raiding, Japanese submarines were primarily reserved for tactical operations against enemy warships. This strategic decision would prove catastrophic. While American submarines systematically destroyed the merchant fleet that kept Japan's war economy alive, Japanese submarines hunted American aircraft carriers. More importantly, this tactical focus meant Japanese submariners encountered American anti-submarine warfare systems, primarily in the most dangerous contexts. When American naval forces were most heavily protected and most alert, the sonobuoy shock and the sinking of I-52, the first encounters with the sonobuoy occurred in 1944. After American industry had perfected the technology, sonobuoys were deceptively simple devices, small, battery-powered sonar units that could be dropped from aircraft and would float on the ocean surface, listening for submarine sounds and transmitting them via radio to the aircraft above. Developed by the British in 1944 under the code name High, they were quickly improved and adopted by American forces. The impact was revolutionary. Previously, an aircraft hunting a submarine had to rely on radar or maintain visual contact, which only worked when the submarine was surfaced. Once a submarine dived, it was effectively invisible to aircraft. Sonobuoys changed everything. An aircraft could drop a pattern of 5 sonobuoys, color-coded blue, red, yellow, orange, and purple, creating an underwater listening grid. The aircraft would monitor each buoy in turn, listening for sounds emitted by submarine movement, machinery, or propellers. The technology was so effective that it became standard equipment on anti-submarine aircraft throughout 1945 and 1944. For Commander Uno Kameo and the I-52's crew, the first indications that something was wrong came at 11:40 p.m. on June 23, 1944. While she ran on the surface, Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor's Avenger torpedo bomber, launched from the escort carrier USS Bogue, detected I-52 on radar. Taylor dropped flares that illuminated the massive submarine, then attacked with depth bombs as I-52 crash-dived. The first attack nearly missed, explosions bracketing the submarine as she descended. What happened next revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Taylor dropped a purple sonobuoy into the water. Within moments, the distinctive sound of submarine propellers was heard by his radio operator, transmitted from the floating device. Taylor could track I-52 underwater, predicting her movements, following her evasive maneuvers, and positioning his aircraft for the killing blow. He dropped a Mark 24 mine, codename Fido, an acoustic homing torpedo that relentlessly locked onto I-52's propeller noise until it struck. The sonobuoys recorded everything, the sounds of the hull breaking apart, the explosion. Commander Taylor's crew heard what they described as crunching and crackling noises like a tin can being crushed. I-52 sank to the ocean floor 17,000 feet below, taking Commander Kameo, 2 German technicians, 14 passengers, and 94 crewmen to their deaths. The sonobuoy recordings, thin wire spools marked Gordon Wire No. 1 and Gordon Wire No. 2, survived in the National Archives. preserving the final moments of a submarine whose crew never learned what technology had killed them. The sinking of I-52 demonstrated capabilities that terrified Japanese submariners. When details filtered through intelligence networks, American aircraft could track submarines underwater. The implications were staggering. Every time a Japanese submarine dived to escape aircraft, it wasn't escaping at all. It was merely hiding from visual observation while remaining perfectly visible to acoustic senses. American hunter-killer groups centered around escort carriers like the USS Bogue combined acoustic torpedoes, sonobuoys, and radar into integrated systems that transformed submarine hunting from a chance encounter into systematic elimination. USS Bogue's task force alone sank 13 German and Japanese submarines between February 1943 and July 1945, using these methods repeatedly. Japanese submariners began reporting strange experiences. Aircraft would appear over diving positions with impossible accuracy. Despite the submarine being hundreds of feet deep, depth charges would fall in precise patterns. Torpedoes would follow evasive maneuvers as if guided by invisible hands. They were being hunted by technologies their own Navy barely understood, couldn't counter, and hadn't deployed, penetrating the Sea of Japan. The psychological impact deepened with Operation Barney in June 1945, when 9 American submarines, equipped with FM sonar, penetrated the Sea of Japan through heavily mined straits that Japanese planners had considered impregnable. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be Japan's safe haven, protected by 4 lines of underwater mines in Tsushima Strait. Japanese merchant shipping moved freely there, believing that submarines couldn't navigate the minefields. FM sonar, developed specifically to detect underwater obstacles, emitted a distinctive chime whenever mines were detected, a sound American submariners dubbed Hell's Bells. The technology allowed submarines to map entire minefield patterns, identify safe passages, and navigate through barriers that Japanese engineers thought would stop any underwater approach. On June 4, 1945, the first 3 submarines, Spadefish, Creval, and Sea Dog, entered Tsushima Strait submerged. Their FM sonar painted pictures of the minefield on electronic screens, chiming constantly as they wove between mines, sometimes spaced only 50 yards apart. All 3 submarines emerged safely into the Sea of Japan after 20 hours underwater. 2 more groups followed, and within days, 9 American submarines were operating freely in waters Japan had considered absolutely secure. The hunting was spectacular. Between June 9th and June 24th, 1945, the 9 submarines sank 28 Japanese ships, totaling 54,786 tons, including a destroyer and a submarine. They operated with impunity, submerging during the day to attack shipping that believed itself safe from undersea threat, and surfacing at night to charge batteries. Japanese Naval Command was stunned. Survivors reported American submarines operating freely, attacking at will, and escaping without difficulty. Intelligence reports began flowing in describing submarine attacks inside the Sea of Japan. The psychological blow was immense. If American submarines possessed technology that could navigate through minefields that had taken years to lay and could penetrate the most heavily defended waters, then nowhere was safe. The ocean itself had become enemy territory. Japanese submarine commanders operating in these waters immediately understood the implications. They were being hunted by forces possessing technological capabilities Japan couldn't match. Every patrol became an exercise in survival rather than combat effectiveness. The industrial and intelligence gap, the technological gap extended far beyond sonar. American submarines possessed radar sets that could detect surface contacts at ranges exceeding 20 miles in good conditions. Japanese submarines didn't receive radar until June 1944, and even then, only in limited quantities with performance inferior to American systems. This meant American submarines could track targets from beyond visual range, detect Japanese vessels long before they were detected in return, and position themselves for attacks with information advantages Japanese commanders couldn't counter. American submarines also benefited from ultra-intelligence, the code-breaking operation that decrypted Japanese naval communications. American forces knew Japanese submarine schedules, operational plans, supply routes, and patrol areas, often before Japanese submarines received their orders. Combined with sonar and radar superiority, this meant Japanese submarines were operating in an ocean where the enemy knew where they were going, where they were, and what technology could track them getting there. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, commanding I-401, later described the feeling to American interrogators as being constantly tracked, constantly watched, never safe, even when submerged in empty ocean. The paranoia was an accurate assessment of reality, not unjustified. The industrial disparity manifested in ways that shocked Japanese submariners who survived to see American facilities after surrender. While Japan struggled to maintain 70 operational submarines throughout the war, America built 314 submarines between 1941 and 1945, replacing losses faster than combat could inflict them. American shipyards operated around the clock, launching fleet submarines at intervals Japanese yards couldn't approach. The submarines themselves represented industrial capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. While smaller than Japanese giants, American Gato and Balo-class submarines were produced with standardized components manufactured across dozens of factories. Engines, batteries, torpedoes, periscopes, and sonar systems all flowed from separate facilities, arriving at assembly yards in perfectly coordinated streams. A single Gato-class submarine required approximately 140,000 parts manufactured by contractors in 32 states. The supply chain never faltered. When submarines were lost, replacements arrived within months. When submarines needed repairs, spare parts were immediately available. Japanese submarines damaged in combat, however, often waited weeks or months for repairs due to industrial bottlenecks, maintenance facility overload, and parts shortages that American forces never experienced, the torpedo revolution. The torpedo situation exemplified the industrial and technological gap. American submarines began the war with the defective Mark 14 torpedo, a weapon plagued by contact detonator issues, magnetic exploder failures, and depth control problems. For nearly 2 years, American submariners fought with weapons that frequently ran at incorrect depths, passing uselessly beneath targets, or failed to explode. This might have been Japan's opportunity to exploit American weakness. Instead, American submariners themselves conducted their own testing, identified the problems, and implemented fixes despite resistance from the Bureau of Ordnance. By September 1943, the Mark 14's defects were corrected. Simultaneously, the electric Mark 18 torpedo entered service, leaving no wake and thus giving targets no warning of incoming attack. The Mark 24 mine, Fido, which was actually an acoustic homing torpedo, could be dropped from aircraft and would autonomously track submarine propeller sounds until impact. Japanese forces never developed equivalent weapons. Japanese torpedoes were generally reliable but offered no technological advantages. More critically, Japanese industry couldn't produce them in quantities approaching American output. American submarines carried 24 torpedoes on patrol, firing them freely, knowing resupply was guaranteed. Japanese submarines carried fewer torpedoes and were constrained to fire them conservatively due to limited availability, mathematical inevitability, and devastation. The cumulative effect of these industrial and technological advantages created a mathematical inevitability that Japanese submariners gradually understood. Every patrol, every encounter, and every narrow escape from American anti-submarine forces reinforced the same lesson. The ocean belonged to America now. American submarines sank an average of 1 Japanese ship per day throughout 1944, the peak year of their campaign. In that single year, 492 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling 2,187,180 tons, were destroyed by submarine attacks. Japanese submarine construction couldn't replace the vessels being lost. Japanese merchant marine capacity, which stood at approximately 6 million tons in 1941, had fallen to 2 million tons by August 1945, with only 320,000 tons in condition to carry cargo. The destruction of Japanese shipping wasn't just a military problem. It represented the systematic strangulation of Japan's war economy. Oil from the Dutch East Indies couldn't reach Japanese refineries. Rice from Southeast Asia couldn't reach Japanese cities. Tin, rubber, tungsten, all the materials Japan needed to continue fighting, were trapped in overseas territories while American submarines patrolled the sea lanes. By 1945, American submarines were having difficulty finding targets large enough to justify torpedo expenditure. The Japanese merchant marine had been virtually eliminated. What few ships remained either stayed in port, unwilling to risk the journey, or hugged coastlines, using narrow channels where submarine operations were dangerous. Japanese cabinet ministers would later tell the Diet that the loss of shipping was the greatest cause of defeat, acknowledging that American submarines accomplished more toward victory than any other single weapon system. The end of confidence for Japanese submariners, who survived the war and witnessed American operations firsthand after surrender. The technological revelations were devastating. Captain Arizumi, one of Japan's most experienced submarine officers and developer of the I-400 submarine program, committed suicide aboard I-401 rather than face surrender. He understood what many Japanese naval officers were beginning to accept. Japan had challenged an industrial power whose technological capabilities exceeded anything Japanese planners had anticipated. When I-400 and I-401, the massive submarine aircraft carriers, surrendered in August 1945, American sailors who boarded them were astounded by their size. These submarines displaced more tonnage than anything in the American submarine fleet, were longer than American destroyers, and possessed capabilities that seemed futuristic. Yet they had accomplished nothing operationally. The planned attack on Ulithi Atoll was cancelled when hostilities ended. The planned strike on the Panama Canal never occurred. These magnificent vessels, representing scarce industrial resources and thousands of hours of engineering work, contributed nothing to Japan's war effort precisely because American technological superiority made their missions impossible. They couldn't operate safely in American-controlled waters. They couldn't reach their targets undetected. They couldn't survive the acoustic torpedoes, the sonobuoys, the radar, and the systematic anti-submarine warfare systems that American forces had perfected. American examination of captured Japanese submarines revealed critical weaknesses alongside impressive engineering. Their large size and construction created acoustic signatures that American sonar operators could identify from miles away, making the submarines easy to detect on sonar. The hulls were not as strong as American or German designs, limiting safe diving depth. They lacked an equivalent to American FM sonar for mine detection. They had no radar until very late in the war. Their anti-aircraft defenses were inadequate against American aircraft that hunted them with increasing effectiveness. Most critically, Japanese submarines lacked the integrated fire control systems that made American submarines so deadly. American submarines used target data computer systems that automatically calculated firing solutions, accounting for target course, speed, range, and torpedo characteristics. Japanese submarines relied on manual calculations that took longer, were more error-prone, and put submarines at greater risk during attack approaches. The technological gap was profound and pervasive, not subtle, affecting every aspect of submarine operations. The human cost and lasting lessons. The human cost of this technological inferiority was staggering. Japan lost 130 submarines during the war, a loss rate approximately twice the percentage of American submarines. Of the 70 submarines Japan possessed in December 1941, plus those built during the war, most were destroyed by American anti-submarine forces, using the very technologies Japanese submariners had come to fear: radar, sonar, systematic hunter-killer operations, aerial attack, and depth charges. Approximately 10,000 Japanese submariners died during the war, a casualty rate exceeding 70%. Submarine service, initially considered prestigious and honorable, became recognized as a death sentence by war's end. Young men assigned to submarine duty understood they likely wouldn't survive. The Japanese submarine force, which had entered the war with pride and confidence, ended the war as a broken arm of a defeated navy, its capabilities nullified by technological inferiority, and its survivors demoralized. The psychological transformation of Japanese submariners mirrored the experience of German POWs in America. But the path was different. Where German prisoners witnessed American prosperity and abundance directly, Japanese submariners experienced American technological superiority through lethal encounters at sea. Both groups reached the same conclusion through different evidence. Japan and Germany had challenged nations whose technological and industrial capabilities exceeded anything Axis powers could match. For Japanese submariners who surrendered in August 1945, the evidence of American superiority was undeniable and overwhelming. They were brought aboard American submarines and shown technology they had never seen. They toured American naval facilities, witnessing production capabilities that explained why American forces never seemed to run short of anything. They saw the FM sonar that had allowed American submarines to penetrate minefields. They examined the sonobuoys that had hunted their comrades. They studied the radar systems that gave American submarines eyes beyond visual range. They handled the acoustic torpedoes that had destroyed so many Japanese submarines. Lieutenant Commander Nambu, taken aboard USS Seagull after surrendering I-401, was given a tour by Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson. Nambu examined Seagull's torpedo loading mechanisms, her fire control computer, her sonar systems, and her radar. Everything was more advanced than equivalent Japanese systems. More importantly, everything worked reliably. Equipment didn't break down. Systems functioned as designed. American submariners operated their boat with a casual confidence that came from knowing their support was guaranteed and their technology was superior. Johnson's crew had survived 9 war patrols, evaded enemy anti-submarine forces, sunk Japanese vessels, and expected to survive the war. Japanese submariners had no equivalent confidence. They operated knowing American technology could find them, track them, and kill them. The psychological burden was immense. Nambu later told interrogators that the moment he understood Japan had lost wasn't when he heard of Nagasaki or Hiroshima, but months earlier when he monitored American radio traffic and heard the casual efficiency with which American forces coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean. The technological sophistication implied in everyday procedures, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, and the sheer scale of American operations all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. The evidence continued to accumulate during the months after surrender. Japanese submariners were brought to American bases in Japan, including Sasebo, where captured submarines were studied, and Tokyo Bay, where surrender ceremonies occurred with American submarines prominently displayed. Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, made a point of having his flag hoisted aboard the I-400 and I-401 during the surrender ceremony on September 2, 1945, aboard USS Missouri. The symbolism was clear. American submarines had defeated Japanese submarines through industrial and technological superiority. When I-400 and I-401 were taken to Hawaii for detailed examination by American naval engineers, Japanese crew members accompanied them as technical advisors. They watched American engineers methodically disassemble their boats, measuring every dimension, photographing every component, and documenting every system. The Americans were professional, thorough, and impressed by some aspects of Japanese engineering, but they were not intimidated. American engineers had seen and understood these submarines. They had defeated them not through superior seamanship, but through superior technology deployed with overwhelming industrial capacity. The final revelation came in mid-1946 when I-400, I-401, and other captured Japanese submarines were taken to sea off Hawaii and deliberately sunk as target ships. The decision was partly driven by American forces' refusal to let Soviet engineers study Japanese submarine technology, so they destroyed it. But the symbolism resonated with Japanese submariners who learned of the decision. Their finest submarines, vessels that could carry aircraft across the Pacific and strike American cities, vessels that represented Japan's technological apex, were casually destroyed by forces that no longer needed them for study. American submarine technology had advanced beyond anything Japanese boats could teach. Their destruction was barely noted in American records, and the vessels that had once represented Japanese naval power were reduced to target practice. The message was clear for Japanese submariners. Japan had built impressive submarines, but America had built technology that made them obsolete. The ocean had simply taken time for American industrial and technological superiority to fully manifest. It had never truly been Japan's. The lessons learned by Japanese submariners spread through post-war Japan as survivors returned home and shared their experiences. Many wrote memoirs describing their shock at American technological capabilities. Others gave lectures to Japanese self-defense force personnel about the importance of technological parity in modern warfare. The submarine veterans associations that formed in the 1950s and 1960s focused heavily on understanding why Japan's submarine force had achieved so little despite impressive engineering. The conclusions were unanimous. Industrial weakness, technological inferiority, and strategic misuse had doomed Japanese submarines from the start. No amount of determination, skill, or courage could overcome the fundamental asymmetry in capabilities. American submarines operated with technological advantages at every level: logistics, navigation, communication, fire control, and detection. Japanese submarines, regardless of how skillfully operated or well-designed, were fighting from positions of permanent disadvantage. The submariners who learned this lesson carried it into Japan's post-war reconstruction, influencing technological development, industrial policy, and military planning for decades. The economic miracle that transformed Japan in the 1950s and 1960s was partly informed by lessons learned during the war. Japanese industry focused on competitive advantage, quality control, and technological excellence rather than grandeur or size. The I-400 submarines had been ineffective but impressive. Post-war Japan built more reliable, smaller, and more technologically advanced products. The emphasis shifted from creating impressive individual achievements to building integrated systems that worked reliably. Former Japanese naval officers, including submarine veterans, took positions in companies like Sony, Honda, and Toyota, influencing their development. These companies, which became global leaders, learned from military failures during the war. They understood that technological superiority required complete systems, quality assurance, reliable production, and continuous improvement, not just good ideas. The superiority America demonstrated during the war profoundly shaped post-war Japanese industrial philosophy. The transformation reached its completion in the 1960s and 1970s, as Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force submarines began incorporating American technology. Japanese submariners, operating boats designed with American assistance, used American sonar systems, learned American tactics, and trained with American instructors. The former enemies had become allies, united by the recognition that industrial capacity and technological excellence determined outcomes in modern warfare. For Japanese submariners who had endured the war, this transformation validated their post-war assessment. Japan needed to match American technological capabilities, not merely admire them from a position of inferiority. By the 1980s, Japan's submarines were among the world's finest, skillfully incorporating lessons learned through painful defeat. The circle was complete. The submariners who had been hunted by American sonar were now building submarines using equivalent technology, having learned through defeat what victory had taught their former enemies. The enduring testimony, the destruction of I-52, preserved on wire spools in American archives, remains a testimony to the technological revolution in warfare. Modern analysis of those recordings by the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory conclusively confirmed that acoustic homing torpedoes, guided by sounds transmitted through sonobuoys, destroyed I-52. The technology that killed Commander Kamiyo and his crew in June 1944 represented capabilities Japan never matched throughout the war. Those same capabilities, improved and refined, became standard in modern navies worldwide. Radar, acoustic torpedoes, and sonar all evolved from the technologies that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 and 1945. The story of Japanese submarine crews realizing the ocean was no longer theirs is, ultimately, a story about technological change in warfare. Superior technology, deployed with massive industrial capacity, trumped determination, skill, and courage. Japanese submariners were not incompetent. They were not cowards. They were operating with inadequate technology against forces possessing decisive advantages. The psychological journey from confidence to the recognition of defeat paralleled the experience of German POWs in America, though the context differed. Both groups encountered American capabilities they couldn't counter, couldn't explain, and eventually couldn't deny. Both returned to their homelands carrying lessons about industrial and technological competition that shaped post-war development, influencing Reconstruction by emphasizing the importance of matching, rather than simply resenting or admiring, American capabilities. The ocean that Japanese submariners once prowled with confidence became an American domain through technology and industry. Radar swept the horizon beyond visual range. Sonobuoys floating on the surface transmitted sounds from below. Acoustic torpedoes hunted submarines autonomously, Hunter-killer groups coordinated surface vessels and aircraft into integrated systems that eliminated submarines systematically. The transformation was complete by mid-1945, leaving Japanese submarines with no safe harbor, nowhere to hide, and no hope of survival. When the 9 American submarines of Operation Barney emerged from the Sea of Japan through La Pérouse Strait in late June 1945, having sunk 28 Japanese ships in supposedly impregnable waters, the psychological defeat of Japanese naval forces was complete. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters using technology to navigate through minefields, then Japanese naval supremacy was finished. The ocean belonged to those who controlled the technology. Japanese submariners understood this lesson viscerally. They had been tracked, hunted, and killed by technologies they couldn't counter and couldn't see. Those who survived carried the knowledge that Japan's defeat was inevitable once American technological and industrial superiority fully manifested. The ocean had never truly been Japan's. It had only taken time for reality to assert itself. American acoustic torpedoes, sonobuoys, industrial capacity, and radar systems had fundamentally transformed submarine warfare. Japanese submariners, regardless of their skill or courage, were operating in an environment where the enemy possessed decisive technological advantages. The realization, gradual at first, came through accumulated encounters, reports from other submarines, and close escapes. By 1945, it was universal among survivors. The ocean was no longer theirs. It belonged to the nation that built the technology to control it. America won the undersea war not through superior seamanship, but through superior science, engineering, and industrial capacity. The legacy endures in modern naval warfare. Sonar remains fundamental to submarine operations. Acoustic torpedoes are standard weapons. Sonobuoys, vastly improved from their 1944 versions, patrol oceans worldwide, dropped from ships and aircraft. The technological revolution that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 continues evolving, with modern submarines using capabilities that would astound both American and Japanese forces from World War II. But the fundamental lesson remains unchanged. Technological superiority, backed by industrial capacity, determines outcomes in modern warfare. The legacy endures in modern naval warfare. Sonar remains fundamental to submarine operations. Acoustic torpedoes are standard weapons. Sonobuoys, vastly improved from their 1944 versions, patrol oceans worldwide, dropped from ships and aircraft. The technological revolution that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 continues evolving, with modern submarines using capabilities that would astound both American and Japanese forces from World War II. But the fundamental lesson remains unchanged. Technological superiority backed by industrial capacity determines outcomes in modern warfare.